After years, Demon's Souls has finally been added to my FromSoft belt of accomplishments, and boy, was it a unique adventure. But I've already made a video detailing some of my initial thoughts on my first playthrough. Feel free to check that one out in the description. But now, we're off to the meat, the boss ranking, the bread and butter of this channel. Let's start with the blatantly worst boss of the game, the aptly named number 18 Leechmonger. Was this even a boss? To be fair, I entered the Valley of Defilement Archstone last, as I thought the difficulty scaled across the Archstones, not the deeper you went into them. Yeah, this is such a weird situation for me to be in. Now I'm the noob who's talking out of his ass, while you all are going to have vastly more experience with the game than me. But I guess it's pretty cool, because it's going to let me perhaps have a unique perspective to people who typically make videos on Demon's Souls. This is totally uninformed by popular opinion, because I have religiously avoided everyone else's takes on Demon's Souls until I could finally play through myself. I was trying to avoid spoilers. As for Leechmonger, holy god, this boss is swamp ass. Literally, it's like Shrek took a bunch of acid and is having a trippy, hate-filled spaz attack. There's just about no coordination to any of this fight. In my battle, I walked down, was randomly spazzed on a few times, and then proceeded to kill Leechmonger in a few swings.
This guy stinks!
Yes, I came here late game, but yes, I couldn't figure out how to find a decent strength weapon somehow, and I got stuck with a longsword the entire game. And yes, it still killed this boss this quickly. I can't imagine how horrible this experience would be if you came here early, but this is almost like a pinwheel situation. The boss was pitifully easy while the area was pretty damn challenging. But even being overleveled, it felt like a completely random, uncoordinated mess. There was no flow to combat and no real emotions elicited by the boss. I couldn't even really tell what I was looking at half the time, which means I can't even give props for visual design, although it is kind of creative. The only positive thing I can say is that the arena has a somewhat unique design, but it really only serves as a somewhat pointless extended run-up to a really bad boss. Number 17, Dragon God. What a big, huge, badass design. It's too bad there's like basically no fight. Thankfully, this isn't as bad as the half-assed platforming of a certain bed filled with the opposite of order, but it's honestly not that huge of an improvement. The strategy I figured out was just running up to the rubble on his side and waiting for him to react and then sprinting as fast as I could away from his designated nuclear testing site. Like, this guy swings with the power of 1,000 suns. But as you can tell by my 5 deaths, this was definitely not a foolproof strat. I got one shot 4 too many times and ended up coming back later where I could at least tank some of the hits. In the end, my survival ended up coming down to luck at times, and that's just not something I'd ever say is a good thing in a Souls game. The ballistas are okay, I guess. If it was like the Meteor Bridge battle and the Dragon God needed to be weakened for an eventual face-off. But no, we just slap his face a bit. I will say seeing his ginormous Mondo Rotund face at the entrance was a moment I won't forget. And I get why they put him in a lot of the promo materials. It's just too bad that there's almost nothing dragony about this dragon fight. I wouldn't go as far as to say I hated it, but it's definitely not good. Number 16, Old Monk. I have to ask, has anyone in the history of Demon's Souls ever died to the offline version of this boss? I seriously don't think it would be possible unless you tried. He felt like a spectator to his own demolition, like he didn't mind that I was completely ruining his day. Before I can get any deeper on that, f the stairs and f the stupid slurpy guys blocking the way. I heard there might have been some tomfoolery to do with the run back, because you had to like load in players for the PvP version of this boss, but guess what, f***ers? I played it offline, so why am I getting the online bullshit experience? The opening cutscene is pretty cool, I guess, filled to the brim with the creepy, weird aura of most of Demon's Souls. And then the boss ends up with the dumbest looking turban in the history of the universe, sitting there as you hit him over and over and over and over and over and... So yeah, while this boss is cool for innovating the PvP component, it is kinda a complete dumpster pile and barely above Dragon God only because there is an actual fight. Honestly, with this stupid runback, I could see this going as low as last, but I was generous. I am too generous. I feel like a male Mother Teresa. Father Therese? No, that kinda sounds weird. This boss stinks though, and I can't believe Miyazaki thinks it's the best in the entire series. What? What's this guy on? Number 15, True King Allant. True King Allant is probably how we all see ourselves sometimes. Decrepit, pathetic, and embodiment of the human condition. Well, that got dark. It's obviously hard to place Allant, as this swampy monstrosity would honorably sit in Shrek's toilet, metaphorically from crappy quality and literally from crappy design. Well, that's 2 Shrek metaphors already. Why do I got Shrek in the brain? But Allant plays a crucial role in the simpler yet similarly compelling Souls story of Demon Souls. I think the narrative and lore components bring this fight above the fights that really do piss me off, but it'd be hard to argue to anybody that this is actually a good boss. There are ways to do lore fodder bosses that can still be compelling standalone fights. Wink wink nudge nudge. Number 14, Adjudicator. Thank God we're out of that bottom tier. I didn't want to say it while they were around, but those guys kind of suck. Thankfully, we're now into the tier of bosses that, well, to be honest, they aren't great. They might not even be that enjoyable, but they're pretty inventive and interesting at least, but they all have some fatal flaw. In the case of Adjudicator, well, it's just that he's piss easy. I'm not sure if this is simply because of how late into the game I got here, but he legitimately felt like Pinwheel. Wait, I already said that for the old monk. Huh, seems like there's some easy bosses here. He legitimately felt like Covetous Demon. Is that better? He moves like the air is composed of molasses, and every adjustment, just the tiniest little movement, takes the force of a train engine. The consequence of this is that the fight is slow and simple, and once you figure out his goofy gimmick, it's not going to last more than a few hits. Oddly enough, it's essentially the same mechanic of Tower Knight, where you gotta hit a weak spot until he falls over so you can hit the real weak spot. But this is obviously a stripped back, simplistic version. It's weird because it's later in the game. If he moved a bit faster, had more than 1 to 2 hit combos, or really posed any sort of threat at all, he'd move up because it's pretty creative. But this fight ended up being a cool idea packaged as a snooze fest. Number 13, Fool's Idol. On the other side of the spectrum is Fool's Idol. This is the opposite kind of low-ranking fight, which has plenty of interesting gimmicks and mechanics, but suffers from obnoxious yet arbitrary difficulty spikes. The dude who ambiguously hints at your inability to kill Fool's Idol, the traps, I mean, these things are just stupid. I swear, I would see where they were on the ground and somehow still get hit by them. I could have sworn I was walking around, but no. I guess I'm made of iron because I magnetize right in there every time. The problem is, getting stuck once in these traps can mean certain death. Because the Fool's Idol clones itself Crystal Sage style, you're stuck in one spot with 5 or 6 different mages all firing at you at once. Now what I find not enjoyable gameplay is being frozen in place and being a spectator to my own death. Let me play and die on my own terms! And with any death in Demon Souls, it usually means a multi-minute run back through arduous terrain. Thankfully, deaths to Demon Souls bosses are sparse, but it means that those who do cause death better be top tier bosses, because if not, you're gonna start to piss me off. Even though it was only a couple, Fool's Idol got me there and really annoyed me with a pretty gimmicky one-shot. I'm sure there's some way to get around these traps, but I just could not figure it out. The mechanics of the fight outside of that, though, are pretty well done. It's pretty easy to tell which is the original boss because of the health bars when you lock on, and it's got an amazing atmosphere and aura here. The stained glass really made the boss arena stand out, along with the crowd controlling pews and pillars. But this is definitely one of those cases where you guys are bigger experts than me. I'm the Demon Souls noob, so I got caught in the traps. I'm sure you guys know all the tricks to these bosses. Well, I don't. And honestly, I kind of like that. This is fun. Number 12, Vanguard. Asylum Demon 0.5 is one of the bosses of all time. In all seriousness, there's not a lot to say about Vanguard. I will say I had inordinate amounts of confidence heading into the first fight against him in the tutorial area. Hefty confidence that quickly turned into, well, roll the clip. That is him. I saw the Demon Souls trailer. That's all I've seen of him. Or like the first. Whoa. Oh. So this isn't really the boss, I suppose. It's the version you fight in the 4-1, what the Archtone, I don't know how to call these things. He's an alright fight, I guess, although he's basically a primitive version of a superior boss in Dark Souls 1, and has an extremely limited moveset that makes you back off of him over and over. It's a repetitive, simple, kind of boring boss, but it has a certain charm, being the inspiration for one of the most iconic fights in Dark Souls 1, and being your first boss in the entire Soulsborne universe. I love the fact that he snapped me back to reality.
There goes gravity.
No! Shut up, Eminem. Number 11, Armor Spider. So like I said before, every boss in this tier has a fatal flaw. And I think that could include an attack where you have to run back through the entire arena for 20 seconds 10 times a fight. Other than that, this fight is great. Well, maybe not great, but decent. If you couldn't tell by now, we're one boss fight outside of the top 10, and we're still in like the decent territory. That might say a little itty bitty of what I think about the bosses in this game. What I'll say is in general, they are inventive and creative, but they lack pretty much all of the hallmarks of the best FromSoft bosses, save for a few that we'll definitely get to. I remember hearing in passing here and there that the Demon Souls bosses were the weakest of the series, and I was really excited to kind of be a contrarian and stick up for the classic FromSoft beasts, but nah, I'm a fake and a fraud. With that being said though, I still had a ton of fun with the vast majority of them. But when you're competing with the bosses of Sekiro, Dark Souls 3, Bloodborne, Elden Ring, you got big shoes to fill. It's easy to take where we are for granted, but they had to start somewhere. And compared to Dark Souls 1 and 2, this is definitely in line with what I'd expect. Back to the actual boss though, I do love when you get the chance to face him up close and personal. There's a really cool intensity to the size and imposing nature of his animations and look. I felt a decent challenge here and was constantly having to look out for hints of what attack could be coming next, so I was a lot more engaged with this fight than a lot of the ones below it on the list. So there's a lot of good stuff here, but it's mixed with some of the pretty bad stuff, so we end up in this mid territory. Number 10, Phalanx. Alright, so the first real boss of the game. Oh, come on, Vanguard, don't take it so personally. You're a tutorial boss, I'm sure that accounts for something. God, that guy's such a pain in the ass. I mean, super cool! Awesome boss! Best first boss in any FromSoft game. Jesus, get off my back, Vanguard. Anyways, Phalanx. Okay, so I was a bit lost from the emulator silliness at the start of my playthrough. The controller wouldn't work, so I had to do mouse and keyboard, and it hardly let me move my camera. This made basic tasks brutally challenging for literally no reason, meaning even Phalanx was a bit of a chore. And yet, the boss itself isn't anything too special. It's the typical Deacons of the Deep, Royal Rat Vanguard, Celestial Emissary silliness, but there are a few things that let me give it a few extra points. One is that it's the first real boss. Vanguard, I swear to God if you piss me off. So Phalanx is the first real boss, which I always give some leeway to, as it's more meant to teach you about the game and the mechanics. Second is that it's the first boss to feature the multi-enemy situation, meaning it also has some added creativity points. It came before all of those spammed enemy bosses that I mentioned earlier. And lastly, I think it's a pretty unique design to have these shielded, spear-wielding blobs defending the core that you must damage. All of these caveats mean that the actual boss itself isn't necessarily groundbreaking, but it's a solid introduction into the world of Boletaria. I enjoyed the fight despite the overwhelming jank on my end and the dated mechanics, and it's simple enough to cap a great intro level. Number 9, Maneaters. So I bet a lot of you expected this ROM to be way higher on the list, and by all accounts, it should be. It has an iconic setting with a worthy challenge, visually distinct atmosphere, and a multi-fight that appears evenly balanced. So what's the problem? Well, don't worry, I'm about to tell you, buddies. Well, I hate the run-up. The stupid red brain suckers are probably the worst enemy in any of the FromSoft games. I swear I prefer bone wheels, and every time I die, I have to run for what feels like minutes back to do this pretty challenging boss yet again. I swear to God I died here like 20 times on the run back. But I could ignore that if I didn't also feel like I cheaply got bounced off the bridge more than once in my playthrough. Then on top of that, these guys feel like they straight up bug out in some fights and just sit in the air above you doing nothing for what feels like ages. And because you're using finite healing resources, every piece of wasted time on the run back and against the boss means more farming and more grinding. So basically, it comes down to this fight feeling like it just wastes time overall. It wastes time on the run back, it wastes time with silly, janky, gravity-based deaths on dated control systems, and it wastes time with AI that refuses to engage with you sometimes. Now, if I could put all of this aside somehow, we'd be left with a pretty awesome fight, to be honest. Like, I'd have even considered these guys for the top spot, meaning that over time I'll probably place them even higher as I get used to the frustrating parts of this fight. As I said, it's an iconic setting, and I actually really like their design and their attacks themselves. The fight uses that half health, another one drops trope, but I've come to really love it. It's obviously used in the Bell Gargoyles and Dark Souls 1, which are admittedly much better, but still, it's a welcome addition here. So because this is a mix of greatness and severe grievances, It's above the pure mid of everything below it, but below the more solid fights above that I can really only say positive things about. This is one of the only fights in the game that ever had me at the edge of my seat, really putting my all into every battle. How much of that was my absolute fear of having to go up those stairs again? Definitely a huge chunk of it. But the moveset here felt more engaging and deep than it was in so many of the lesser boss fights of this game. Number 8, Dirty Colossus. After the abysmal Leechmonger, I wasn't expecting anything special to come out of the Valley of I chalked it up to late game rushedness, and I expected a full-on Lost Izalith ending. But I was pleasantly surprised by how fun this fight ended up being. It felt like an iteration of the Rotten, a boss that comes 2 games later, but oddly enough, maybe even better. Of course, the Rotten has the advantage of the previous installments to iterate on, so there are improvements like chopping off the limbs, but in terms of just design and spectacle and overall flow, I actually really enjoyed this fight. I'm assuming this is a scalding take because the Valley of Defilement would just give everyone a bad taste in their mouth. But seriously, this one was pretty fun. It had a terrifying setting with the ominous atmosphere, and I love that the fire in the arena could be used to burn off the bugs that infest you after a hit. Mechanics like these elevate the boss to something that actually tested my skills rather than a complete bore like the old monk or Leechmonger. Of course, I never died to any of these bosses, but forcing the run back on the Dirty Colossus might have sentenced him to a much lower ranking. 5-2 is a dumpster fire, but thankfully I didn't get stuck. Anyways, I had a lot of fun with this guy, fair challenge, actual combos, cool atmosphere and design, and the dividing line before we get into the top tier bosses of the game. Number 7, Storm King. This fight is all spectacle, and that's about it. And there's nothing wrong with that. You can definitely feel the jank in the mechanical department, but the way the Storm Ruler was used here is superior to the Yorm fight. In fact, pretty much everything about this fight is better than the Yorm fight except for that unforgettable music. You have this rainy, stormy cliffside creating a somber atmosphere as you wield the power of storms to attack what feels like a majestic yet disturbing alien creature that pelts you from the heavens. This is the beginning of all the gimmick fight attempts that FromSoft has had, and while it's no Rykard, it's definitely no Bed of Chaos or Dragon God either. Sometimes it does feel a bit off, trying to get your hits in on sky creatures while also dodging. I ended up tanking a lot of hits in my pursuit of alien domination, but I can't say there are many things in gaming that have matched the pure spectacle of this fight. I can't wait to see what it looks like on the remake, as even this old, smelly, stinky game managed to surprise me with the levels of grandness it achieved in this fight. With next-gen graphics and a couple mechanical tweaks, I could see this being an A-tier FromSoft fight. Number 6, Tower Knight. The biggest baddie in all of Boletaria clocks in only at number 6. The aforementioned controller problems might have contributed a bit. Okay, a lot. This guy pissed me off. But I know he's a solid boss. Not only does he have such a sick aura of prestige and honor surrounding him, as he has this pristine armor and is surrounded by his archers, but he also brings a puzzly gimmick to life with some creativity and inspiration. Subsequent fights can suffer from the slog of getting through every archer as well as the horrendous runback, and I really don't like the fact that it seemed like you can't really dodge his attacks. They're just massive AoEs that you have to position around. And he can accidentally hit you because when he repositions, his entire body becomes a hitbox. One of my favorite things in FromSoft games, /S. So there are a few hefty complaints for this hefty boss. But as I said before, he has one of the sickest looks in the game. He's got a badass intro cutscene, inventive design with his 2 gimmicks, the archers and the weak spots, and he's probably the perfect amount of difficulty for this point in the game. But I don't know, he just felt a bit clunky and dated to fight. Some of the bosses suffer horribly from this in this game, while others seem almost completely immune. Tower Knight ends up somewhere in between, while providing a big-ass spectacle to keep it awesome. Number 5, Maiden Astraea. In stark contrast to the less engaging True Allant battle, Maiden Astraea is a storytelling set piece of a boss that remains engaging, mysterious, and captivating from beginning to end. From the ominous cinematic introduction to the Baroque score and morbid groans of the bystanders of the arena, this fight sets itself up to be something memorable. On your trek to Astraea, you may wander into the swampy underbelly and immediately be devoured by bloody children. I have no idea what else to call these things. They are creepy, freaky, disturbing, and should be immediately rejected from your memory unless you want scary dreams tonight. So the journey to the boss can be an adventure in itself, but in the way of you and your destination is a formidable NPC known as Garl Vinland. He hits like a truck covered in TNT, so if you do manage to get hit, you'll be in a bit of trubs. Fortunately, or unfortunately, his AI is somewhat weak, so you can kind of use his aggro range to get easy hits in here and there. Otherwise, you're fighting him on precarious ledges, which is not my ideal way of fighting a certified tank. Just don't spam too much, or you might get parried. Happened to me, and I was instantly one-shot. What is this, Overwatch? This is all kind of the meat of the encounter, but what about the story? Well, that's what makes this boss so special. It almost reminds me of a movie because we basically hear from Astraea that our mission, one that we've been on with almost no consideration, is the farthest thing from noble. When we play video games, we presume to be the hero. NPCs and our common sense tell us that the big guys with health bars at the bottom of the screen and imposing names are the villains, and we are the heroes, ridding the world of their pitiful and hateful existence. Astraea implores us to reconsider our path, something we certainly will not do considering we want to beat the game. But in this moment, the game manages to violently yank you away from your obsession with your quest and actually think. I think that might be what makes FromSoft games feel so special, or different. So many games feel like a chance to wind down after a long day at work or school, or the most recent existential crisis. But I've always found myself leaning into the entertainment that engaged me and challenged me and made me think. It's not inherently better, necessarily, than pure entertainment, but it provides so much more value and meaning to me in my life. This is why I don't really play a lot of games. I find the ones that mean something to me and I commit everything to them. A lot of people seem to get the most out of playing as many games as they possibly can, but not getting too deeply into any of them. Personally, I'd rather find 2 or 3 and go as deep as I possibly could. Maiden Astraea and her short stint of dialogue is exactly why I chose FromSoft games to fit in my few. While the combat is mildly wonky and there isn't too much to the actual fights, everything else here is what makes it stick with me still. Number 4, Old Hero. I'm not sure how much of a hot take this is. You might think I'm blind for loving this guy so much. What can I say other than this boss brings us to the territory of bosses that I really do feel are comparable to our modern gaming masterpieces. I kinda got Dancer of the Boreal Valley vibes. Don't get me wrong, this isn't anything nearly as good as that, but the way he kind of prowls around the arena, the way he shifts from cautious searching to rapid aggression is exhilarating. I love his visual design, size, weapon, and cutscene, and I love that there are a few different ways to approach this fight. I essentially had no complaints about this boss, other than the fact that I guess he could be a little more challenging, but it's okay for the first game in a series to be testing the waters of boss difficulty and design. This is an example of where the gimmicks paid off because there is still a real fight here, while in some of the other gimmicky fights they overtake the entire experience. Oh, and the arena is pretty amazing too. I don't have as much to comment on here, especially because this is the boss that kind of is the stepping ground between the bosses that feel like somewhat dated. Every boss above this point on the list though is going to be an iconic encounter to me, even though I'm not sure any boss in this game can really get up to a 10 out of 10. Before we get into my top 3, I have to say, 95% of you aren't subscribed. And I heard people who aren't subscribed to Nightwalk 2 are 50% more likely to die to Pinwheel. If you want to survive the brutal destruction Pinwheel has brought upon this world, then subscribe quickly. Oh my god, here it comes! Number 3, the Penetrator. Now we're in the category of unequivocally badass fights. And that absolutely has to start at the Penetrator's intro, which had me literally itching to fight him. This weaselly little weasel man had been taunting us all the way from the start of the game, and seeing him get impaled by a boss that looked this badass with the name the Penetrator had my jaw wide open, begging to get a chance to fight him. And I got my wish pretty much instantly. He chucks the body hanging limply off his sword like Artorias and prepares to face you with his glowing blue weapon. This is essentially a beta version of the Pursuer from Dark Souls 2, who has a very similar visual design with a very similar blue hue to his sword. He has slightly unintuitive movement and attacks, which is actually a fresh change of pace to keep you on your toes. And despite not dying to him, I felt like I was almost always on my heels, trying to keep pace with his oddly timed spin. I loved the charm that the blue tinge added to the fight, the epic introduction, and his newfound aggression that was only matched by Maneaters and 2 others that we've yet to mention. This is one of the fights that got me into that flow state that FromSoft bosses always have me looking forward to. The only thing is, this type of fight comes really early in Dark Souls 2, while it comes at pretty much end game here. That's about the only negative I can say because I just had so much fun battling this guy. Number 2, Flamelurker. Okay, so this was the final boss I fought on the clunky ass mouse and keyboard janky emulator setup. Couldn't turn. When I rolled, it often rolled the opposite way that I input. I had heard so many horror stories of Flamelurker and how he is up there with the hardest of the Souls series, and I still first timed him with all my handicaps. Was it a non-stop thrill ride from start to finish though? Abso-freaking-lutely. I loved his look, his aggression, and there is almost no other fight in the game that had me close to this high of a heartbeat. I think he probably could be tuned to be slightly harder and maybe add a couple more combos, but I can imagine that this was a huge wall for players who are new to the series. With the unbelievably long runbacks in this game though, I can see why they didn't want to overtune any of the bosses. Just a few deaths in this game can feel like 10 to 20 in a game like Elden Ring where there are stakes of America right outside of the boss fog. I've heard the remake is a 1-to-1 update from the original, basically only including graphical and quality of life buffs. And that's too bad to hear because this is a fight that I'd love to see FromSoft just add a little bit to. If they added some combo variations and such, I could see this boss catapulting to one of my favorites in the entire series. But with the dated qualities, I just can't quite put it up at the top tier FromSoft level. As for a boss in Demon Souls though, it really does stand out and give me a thrilling and balanced experience that I'm really excited to try again soon in NG+. Oh, and I love his intro cutscene too. But number one is going to have to be False King Allant. And here it is, False King Allant, the big baddie. The Gwyn of Demon Souls, the obvious blueprint for every majorly amazing FromSoft boss from 2009 to now. He feels almost like he was designed for an entirely different game with the amount of buildup he has, the OST, the amount of combos he does, and the sheer gravity of the fight. It's a sick arena with stairs to provide some reprieve from his relentless attacks and such, and he can even suck your levels out. And yes, that's not a euphemism. He will literally suck out your soul level. And for me, that meant I suddenly began fat rolling and had to de-equip all of my armor mid-fight. I don't know if I necessarily love this mechanic, but I gotta say it does make for a unique and heart-pumping experience. And with the absolutely draining run back every death was absolute torture against this guy. So yeah, I was stressed as hell. Allant is fast, imposing, and hits with the force of an alleged king. As I said before, he conjures to mind images of FromSoft best hits, from Gwyn to Soul of Cinder to the Hunter fights of Bloodborne. I love his wind slashes and his speedy distance closing dashes towards you. There is hardly a moment to breathe, and I really got into that classic FromSoft cadence that I've been chasing from the first boss. My only real complaint is the gargantuan, arena-wide AoE that absolutely decimates the previously mentioned tempo of the fight. It goes from non-stop aggression to sudden boredom as you dash away from an unpunishable explosion. Outside of that though, this is a boss that is worthy of the title of best boss in Demon Souls. Many times in FromSoft games, the last boss hasn't really lived up to be the best of the game for me, but I'm glad to say Demon Souls joins the few. Let me know your own ranking down below, and thank you so much for watching. I have another Demon Souls video and my general thoughts linked below, as well as plenty of Elden Ring and other Soulsborne content for your viewing pleasure. Thanks for watching, and have a great day. Peace.